And here I am to announce the grand finale. Get ready, because we are going to have an amazing final session before we close the day. I want to call a very well-known technology journalist, executive editor of Recode, the host of Recode Decode podcast, and the co-executive producer of the Code Conference. Please welcome Kara Swisher.
Welcome, Kara. Hi, everybody. I know it's late in the day and you want to have a drink. So do I. So I'm gonna just, oh, it is bright up here. I'm gonna do a lot of conversation. I'd like people to ask questions. I'm gonna make you ask questions in a second. But I want to talk about a few things, about 8 things I want to keep in mind. And the name of my speech was Men Still Explain Things to Me, the Post-MeToo Movement. It's based on a book by Rebecca Solnit. If you've not read it, you should. It's called Men Explain Things to Me. She had written a previous book, and she was at a dinner party, and a man started explaining her own book to her and telling her what it meant. And she kept saying, it doesn't mean that. And he's like, I think I know better. And she had written the book. So her next book was called Men Explain Things to Me. Which is, I think people have taken that word and somewhat abused it, like fake news and some others. But I want to read the quote from the book because I want to get you in the frame of mind about it. Men explain things to me still. No man has ever apologized for explaining wrongly the things that I know and they don't. Every woman knows what I'm talking about. It's the presumption that makes it hard at times for any woman in any field, that keeps women from speaking up and from being heard when they dare, that crushes women into silence by indicating, the way harassment on the street does, that this is not their world. It trains us in a self-doubt and self-limitation, just as it exercises men's unsupported overconfidence. Some women get erased a little at a time, some all at once, some reappear. Every woman who appears wrestles with the forces that would have her disappear. She struggles with the forces that would tell her story for her or write out her story, the genealogy, the rights of men, the rule of law. The ability to tell your own story in the words and images is already a victory, already a revolt. Most women fight wars on 2 fronts, one for whatever the putative topic is, and one simply for the right to speak, to have ideas, to be acknowledged in the possession of facts and truths. All right, I think it's an amazing piece. It's actually incredibly well spoken. But I want to talk about where we are now, post MeToo, post people losing their jobs over really awful behavior, and talk about where we're headed and what we have to do now with this. I think it's a really critical period because it's one of those times when people get fatigue of MeToo. They get fatigue of talking about what has been going on for centuries. They feel badly. Women tend to feel badly about continuing to complain about something that's well worth complaining about. And I've seen it happen after Ellen Pao trial in Silicon Valley, which we covered really heavily, where it went away. All the issues that it was raising went away. And I was very sorry to see so. And so one of the things that's great about being an entrepreneur and starting your own business and actually being the CEO of that business is you can decide exactly what you'll be covering and what you'll be doing. And when we were covering the Ellen Pao trial, for those of you who don't know, she sued a very famous venture capital firm named Kleiner Perkins for gender discrimination and a number of other things. I'm running the Recode site and editor of it, and what I did is I assigned 2 people to cover it full-time in the court, and we wrote 4 to 5 stories a day on it. And I was approached by one of the men that work for me who I employ, and I always like to remind him of that. And I said, and they're like, well, do you think we should be doing this much coverage? Maybe it's too much, and I have some thoughts. And I said, I don't care what you think. I think we're going to cover it because I think it's an important issue. I think gender issues in the workplace are critically important, and Silicon Valley is one of the worst places on earth for women. So we're going to cover it. And he goes, well, let's have a discussion about it. And I said, how about we do it, and then we do it? And so we did. And it turned out we won all kinds of awards for our coverage because it turned out to be a really critical story. So one of the best things I always say to people is be the boss, because then you get to say what's what. So I'm going to go over about 8 things, and then I'd love some questions from you all. I will solicit questions from you or stories, because I think you should speak up. And it's a couple of things I've been thinking about lately in the post MeToo movement. And I want to start with a thing I want you to keep in mind, because I'm going to say it at the end, which is mother of sons. Okay, just keep that in the back of your head. Mother of sons. I happen to be a mother of sons. I have 2 sons, 16 and 13, and they're very lovely. I do not beat them up all the time, but they are tremendous young men, and really just tremendous young men. So let me begin by saying number one. I wrote an essay last week about Mark Zuckerberg going to the Senate and speaking in front of Congress at the hearings. And a lot of the coverage that preceded it talked about how he was a boy genius. Would he make it? Could he somehow survive this grilling by Congress? Would he be able to? Sort of treating him like he was a juvenile, like he was a boy. So I wrote an essay that said, let me just fill you in on something. Mark Zuckerberg is 33 years old. He has $46 billion. He has 2 children. He can wear a suit and not sweat in it. I'm pretty certain he has that. And the point I was making about that was that men are not boys. Men, keep that in mind, men are not boys. We do not treat them like boys. When men become men, they have to act like men, which is to say adults. And I think what happens in Silicon Valley, at least, and throughout tech, is that men become juvenilized. We treat them as if their mistakes and their errors are things they are not responsible for. There is a very good reason why Facebook is in the situation it is in, because they didn't manage it correctly like adults. They were not facing the consequences of the platform they were creating. They were just willy-nilly creating a platform and not putting safeguards into place. And a lot of the excuses were made is, hey, we're here young and fresh and making things, and therefore we should be, like toddlers, we should be able to make a mess of the room and the rest of you can clean it up. Well, as you can see, the situation that Facebook's in is that they have made a big mess. They have mismanaged a platform that is really innovative and really interesting, and now want to use words like, and if you watch these hearings, it was fascinating, we now take a broader responsibility. He said it about 53 times. It was one of those talking points they give CEOs when they appear in front of things. We now take a broader responsibility. That means, is it he that takes the responsibility since he's the CEO and happens to be the billionaire? Who is it that takes the responsibility? It abrogates responsibility, which is something that we allow tech leaders to do who are largely men to do, and we have to stop doing that. If they did something wrong, they have to be responsible for it, and either fixing it or getting the hell out of the room and letting someone else do it. In that regard, the same thing that happened around Travis Kalanick, the CEO of Uber. We wrote quite a bit about that, and we're one of the publications that I say proudly, we got him out of his job. He was terrible at his job, and he deserved to be fired. And he, thank you. I've gotten women fired too, but more men. That's not my goal, is not to do that. But they allowed and coddled and allowed him to behave in certain ways that if you understood how much was going on there, because not all of it was reported, because we weren't able to report everything, you would be shocked if your children did such things. And the way they treated women, the way they treated people of color, the way they treated their employees, the way they treated all kinds of things was directly from him. And yet they still, even to this day in Silicon Valley, saying, oh well, that's just Travis being Travis. It is not acceptable. That's number one. 2, women are not girls. Men are not boys, women are not girls. And the way that women get treated in Silicon Valley is in that regard, in terms of not being treated as the adults they are. There's all kinds of microaggressions that go on in Silicon Valley every day. I'll give you one that I just encountered. I can't believe someone actually does it to me. I'm shocked by it every time it happens. But I was on a panel about Uber where we were talking about the coverage we did, which I thought was really strong. We particularly spent a lot of time writing about a woman who was raped in India, and executives at the company got a hold of her medical files illegally, and were trying to make it seem like she lied. She did not lie, but they were illegally obtaining medical files in order to impugn her in a trial, which was just not, it was just awful. It was an awful thing to do. And so I was on talking about how we got that story and some others that we did around behavioral, around memos that were juvenile and things like that. And I walked out with an Uber investor was on the panel, and myself and two other men. And we had really done what I thought our reporters had done amazing work on it. And we walked on the stage, and look, I don't dress that well. Like, let's just be honest, I dress terribly. I recently did a Stitch Fix. I was trying Stitch Fix out, which is a box thing, and they couldn't get me right. They kept sending me clothes, and I had sent them back every time. And finally, they sent me a box that I really, really liked, and I kept 3 of the 5 things. And the stylist said, finally, I realized you're simple and androgynous, which is super rude, but okay, you're right. And I kind of liked her after. I was like, you're my kind of gal. So in any case, I was dressed like this or something of it. And the guy with me, this investor, happens to be a real popinjay. He loves to dress. He has beautiful clothes. He had a purple suit on. It was gorgeous. He looked fantastic. And we sit down for this panel, and this is a serious panel about what happened at Uber. And the moderator turned to me and said, Kara, don't you look pretty today? Which I was like, what? No, I don't. Like, first of all, I was like, no, I don't. That's factually inaccurate. And I thought, this is one of those moments where women just let that one go by, like a little ball, like I'll let that one shoot by my head. And I went, excuse me, can I ask you why you called me pretty? Because it has nothing to do with Uber. Like, what does my looks have to do with this panel? And let me just start by point of fact, I am not pretty right now. I look terrible. I'm not wearing a pretty clothes. I'm not a little girl. I'm not a little pretty little girl. And the guy next to me sure is pretty. He's real pretty. I would say, extremely pretty is what he's looking like, because he's wearing this purple suit, and I objectified him completely. And the moderator tried his hardest, like, well, I was just trying to be nice. And I said, why do you think you were trying to be nice to me? But why do you think that's a compliment to call me pretty? I'm going out with someone. I don't need more dates. What is the reason for calling? And I just did this on the stage as the whole crowd was roaring, essentially. And he's like, well, I was trying to be nice. And I said, well, we're talking about a serious topic. What I think is happening here is I'm a higher level of journalist than you are, and you're insecure because I'm sitting here with you, and so you have to find a way to diminish me in order to make me feel at your level, which is super low. And so it was great, and I said, no, let's talk about Uber. So women are not girls. The third one, those girls can do math. So can people of color. So can everybody. This canard that people, women and girls and people of color are not good at math is a lie. What happens is these systems are designed, and the courses are designed as you move up the stream for moving out of it. Why would you want to be in a lot of these courses? The way they're created and designed and run make it impossible or much more difficult for girls to succeed. But every single study shows at a very young age, girls are better at math. One of the ones Sheryl Sandberg noted in one of her in Lean In was that if you do tests of girls, and I think around 6th or 7th grade, and you remove their names from the tests, they score better than boys on tests. When you put the names back, the scores are different. It's an astonishing kind of thing that goes on. There are all kinds of, there's studies of that boys, crawling is regarded better than girls it goes on and on. So they're good at math, they are good at science, they are good at everything else. They are equally good, if not better in some cases. I know that's something that Silicon Valley thinks about when they talk about the pipeline. The fact is there is an ability to have a pipeline. The only thing that hinders it is how we teach and move people up the stream. In that vein, diversity is a business imperative. Diversity, besides the fact that it's the right thing to do, which is why you should do a lot of things these days, I think. If you don't want to use that argument, which is be decent, then the argument you need to use is that it's a business imperative. Study after study after study shows diversity makes things better. Companies that are diverse are better. They have better ideas. They have more innovation. They have more they're more able to deal with change. They have more thoughts in terms of how to deal with things. They have more ideas. And I'm not just talking about gender diversity at all. I'm talking about age diversity. I'm talking about race diversity, experience of life diversity, geographical diversity. the whole premise of this country is about diversity, or it used to be until recently. And it still is. The strength of this country and the strength of businesses are diversity of people coming from elsewhere and doing and creating new things together. I can send you, if anyone wants to email, I can send you, there's about 20 to 30 major studies showing this. So there's no reason not to do it other than pure laziness. And that's where I get to unconscious bias, which is I think people tend to lean on. I didn't mean to do this. I didn't consciously mean to have bias. There's no such a thing. Unconscious bias is a word for laziness, is that you're not paying attention to what's going on around you. I run a big conference called the Recode Conference. We try really hard. Last year we had 50-50 gender diversity on stage, which let me just tell you, if you're inviting the Bill Gates of the world and everyone else, it's really hard to find 50-50 women every year. This year we have not succeeded, where I'm trying in the last month to do so. But we spent a lot of time consciously realizing the problems that we have and doing something about it. When you think about, I understand the ideas behind conscious bias, and I know there's a lot of science and people, they have all kinds of seminars and things like that. But the fact of the matter is, if you look around a table and you see only people like you, and you don't notice it, you are being lazy. You are not paying attention, you're not being a really good manager. It's as simple as that. Years ago, and I think my best lead is the first sentence of a story I've written. I was trying to push boards of tech companies into adding more women and people of color to their boards. Most of these boards are essentially white men, and there's no reason on boards. There are plenty of qualified people of all kinds to serve on boards. They can make as many STEM arguments as you want, or pipeline arguments, but on boards there are plenty of qualified women and people of color to join boards. And so the Twitter board, which is supposed to represent humanity, half of the people who use Twitter are women, or more than half, and there's an enormous audience of people of color on this board, but the board remained stubbornly 10 white men. And luckily for me, they had certain names. These guys had first names. And I said, here on the board of Twitter, which has 3 Peters and a Dick, they have a problem with diversity. They did. They had 3 Peters. Peter Chernin, Peter Fenton, and the other Peter, and Dick Koslow was the CEO. The CEO called me and said, that was just awful. And I said, yes, it's just awful that you have 3 Peters and a Dick on your board. And so I kept saying it to him. Later they added a woman. I think there's another. They haven't done anything about it, if anything, but I felt good about it myself. So my point was that you can consciously change things if you just pay a little bit of attention. I was just out to lunch with a VC, and I consider it a minor victory, though I don't think it's that much of a victory. He was adding a woman partner to a firm that had not had women in the partnership. But he was pretty good in the director level, which is just below partners. And he said to me, you know what I did? You know what I did? And I'm like, what? Like, he acted like he was a boy, that he wanted mom's approval. He said, I noticed that women did not speak up in these meetings. And I was like, oh, you did? You noticed that? Good for you. And he goes, yeah, it was really interesting. And I thought, why aren't they doing that? I'm not getting feedback. I wonder what's going on. I go, I wonder what's going on. I wonder what's going on. And he goes, so what I did is that I made them talk. I asked them direct questions, and then all these people were like, well, maybe you shouldn't do that, because then you're like, it's enabling people not to, just like, maybe you should just see what happens. But I didn't. I just made them talk. And then after 3 months, everybody was talking in the meeting. And I was like, wow, that's an astonishing revelation for you. And I tried really hard to be supportive, but I thought, what an idiot. He didn't recognize that people don't talk in meetings, because the way the meetings had been conducted made it impossible for people to speak up, especially on a lower level. If you're a woman at a lower level, you're not going to speak up against a partner. I'm glad he had the revelation, and I'm glad he's doing it, but the fact of the matter is he actually was trying. I didn't want to give him too much credit, because I wanted to give him encouragement, but not like it was the greatest thing in the world. But the fact of the matter is, you can do something about it if you pay attention and look up and pick your head up from the table. The last 2, I was interviewing last night Nell Scoville, who co-wrote Lean In with Sheryl Sandberg, the book, which is 5 years old now, which is really pretty shocking to think about how long that's been around. There's a lot of issues with lean in. A lot of people have a lot of issues with the idea that women have to take responsibility for everything and have to lean in. She definitely went back and discussed the difficulties of a single, after her husband died, realized the difficulties single women face. It became, although she happens to be a billionaire, so it's a little easier for her. But she definitely began to realize how difficult it is to do single parenting, all kinds of things. So she's made corrections to it. But I asked this woman, Nell, who actually wrote the book together with her, what she would do today. What would be the name of the book that she would write today? And so she said the sequel to it would be called, it would be aimed at men. It would be called Make Room. Make room, which is like, women don't just have to lean in, men have to move over and make room for women. She was saying this is the kind of thing we have to start to encourage, that women need this space there. If a man is on 3 corporate boards, maybe he could move off of one and make space for a woman or a person of color. Maybe there's something that men have to think about in terms of being allies of women, in terms of thinking about this and making space. I think, going back to my sons, anyone who has a teenage boy understands space. When you're trying to walk down a sidewalk with a teenage boy, you need to walk way back because they take up all the space and never notice it, not even for 1 second, even when you're yelling at them. So I thought that was a really interesting idea, and I tried to make it even stronger. She was being polite, and I thought, well, not just make room, but if you won't make room, get the fuck out of the way, because I'm coming through. So it was an interesting idea, and I do think we have to think about that in terms of how men can think about this and not feel as if they've been attacked too much. That's what's happened with the MeToo movement. There's a lot of backlash. It's like, whoa, not all of us are assholes, which really wasn't the point, but thank you so much for shifting the discussion to you, which is sort of like was fascinating to me. I'm like, it's not about you. I know you think it's about you, but it's really totally not about you, and that you behave well is not an asset. It's the lowest bar on the totem pole that you have to behave well. In that vein, if we just focused on sexual harassment, which we absolutely have to eradicate, we're not focusing on the things that are really critical also, which is equal pay, equal access, equal pay for equal work, and the ability to be promoted and trained going forward. Those are the critical things. The more money you make, the more power you have, the harder it is not to continue to have women. That is where it is all, that is where the game is where money is. A couple of years ago, I sold my company to Vox Media, and who's great, the guy who runs it's a tremendous guy, but when they were negotiating, I had a pretty large salary at my other place, because I did, and I was trading stock for cash. And they were trying really hard to get even though I am responsible for an enormous amount of revenue at the company, and I know it, if I'm not there, it doesn't happen. They were trying to get, for some reason, my salary down, lower, so I wouldn't have the highest salary of the company, or a high salary, essentially. I don't know what the other salaries of the company are, although I think salaries should be transparent. And so they were doing the trick that you like to do, that people like to do, and it works really well with women. It really does, saying, hey, if you just take a little less, and it was substantively less as far as I was concerned, then we can all be friends, and then we can go on, and it'll be great. Like, they kept doing that kind of thing. Like, hey, be nice, come on, be nice. And I said, how about I stay a bitch, you give me the money, and then we go for drinks? How about that? And they did. So one of the things that I think is important is to get equal pay for equal work, more pay for equal work. I don't care, whatever it is that it takes to get the kind of pay, because pay is where it matters, as well as title, as well as power, real power in a company. I'm not talking about middle of the company, I'm talking about the tops of the company, which is more difficult. I don't think, one of the things I tend to do right now at the MeToo movement is we're now starting to excuse these microaggressions among people and saying it's not on purpose. All these things are on purpose. They do them for a reason. They don't maybe they don't realize they're doing, but a lot of, especially the microaggressions, is, do you have to be so loud? Do you have to do this? Do you have to do this? They are on purpose. Do not think it is an accident. They are happening because they mean to happen. And the last thing, I think in that vein, you need to stay angry about it. It's very easy to give up anger right now around a lot of a lot of this stuff. And it's very easy to feel that, oh, maybe I should just back off and things like that. No social movement has ever succeeded by people who back off. They only succeed when you stay angry, and you stay angry until you get what you need. And it's really important to not confuse anger with rage and useless rage. Staying angry is a useful tool. I was recently, and I'll tell you one last story, and then I'd be happy to answer quick questions for a few minutes. I was on stage with Sundar Pichai, who's wonderful. He's the CEO of Google. He's a wonderful guy. I find him to be a great leader. I think he tries very hard to be, he has a lot of women leaders at the company, thinking about it a lot, making sure it happens a lot. And they're highly qualified women. He just spends a lot more time figuring it out than most people. But in the middle of the interview, we were talking about diversity and issues at Google, because Google still remains 70% men and 90% white men in the engineering ranks, which is just an astonishing number. And that's the same number at every tech company. And I said, what do you need to do to change this? Does this concern you? And he said, as a father of daughters, which is the line, as the father of daughters, I think this is important. And you heard that during the Pussygate last year. As the father of daughters, I'm offended. Well, as the mother of sons, I'm offended that men can only relate to it if they have daughters. Men should relate to this because it's not because they have a daughter and they're worried about their daughter. It also talks to the next generation. It says we're going to fix it in the next generation, not this one. And so, as much as I love fathers of daughters, I wish I had one myself. I really think we have to really stay strong in insisting that men understand that it's an issue for now. It's an issue for everybody, and it's critical for the future of our country and this world that we begin to have more equitable workplaces. The next 20 years is going to be so hard on everybody. I'm not giving you the speech of the Terminator speech, but it's coming. Jobs are at risk. There's all kinds of displacement that's going to happen with new technologies that are coming. We have to think really hard about the kind of workplace we have so that it is both diverse, it is meaningful, and it actually reflects the kind of people we want to be. So questions, please? Questions from people? Come on. Over there. Also, women have to speak up.
Now
FYI.
you piqued my curiosity. Can you give us a minute about the Terminator speech?
Yeah, sure.
Only because I've got kids and they're working. And
yeah, don't be a radiologist.
Yeah.
So there's lots of jobs that right now there's a bunch of forces at work in Silicon Valley that I think people aren't paying quite enough attention to. It's talked about here: AI and super AI, robotics and innovation, self-driving. And I mean that in a broader sense. I don't mean just truck drivers losing their car. When you start to have self-driving cars, so many industries collapse, if you think about it. There's AI, those are the main ones. There's one more, I'm blanking. Essentially just machine learning. Right now, a lot of the jobs where they talk about like coal miners and things like that, guess what? We're not gonna have coal miners mine coal. They're gonna be done by robots. That's just the way it is. By the way, it's safer. People shouldn't probably mine coal. They're doing it in Sweden right now. They're doing it everywhere. If you visit any Amazon facility, you see that a lot of the stuff they do is easily automated and should be easily automated. And if you look at AI, all kinds of jobs, any job that can be digitized will be digitized. Let's just make that clear, will be digitized. Not maybe we not. That means legal stuff, lawyers, doctors, accountants. And so you have to think really hard about what that means, because those are high-paying jobs in the economy. And what happens when those become digitized? Do they create more jobs? How do we create more jobs if we're going to eliminate jobs? And so big swatches of the economy where we rely on high-paying jobs are going away. They're absolutely going away, and it's going to be in a very short time frame versus the long time frame that we went from farming to manufacturing. It's a very condensed time frame. And if you take just one of the trends, like self-driving cars, you don't just have truck drivers, you have mechanics, you have insurance companies, you have parking lots, it just goes on and on and on. And so you have to iterate it out and think really hard about what your children are going to do. And I think one of the things that I think about with my kids, my one son loves to cook, he wants to be a chef, great. Robots can't do that well. Honestly, they can't. Maybe someday in some parts, but it's really difficult. It's a really difficult thing to. So anything that's creative, anything that requires creativity, healthcare right now actually is a really good area. Certain kinds of healthcare, because robots don't. We're not quite to the cyborg time yet, which we will be eventually, but you'll be dead, so don't worry about it. So you have to think about anything that, if you can think of a way to digitize your job, it will be digitized. So.
Hi, I'm a high school senior and rising college freshman looking to study engineering.
Cool.
And you mentioned before how the game is all in the power and the money, but everything has a beginning, and it usually starts once you start entering college.
Right.
What advice do you have for girls my age or around my
Where are you going?
Technion?
Okay, cool. You know, it's interesting. I did a really interesting interview with Maria Claway, who's the head of Harvey Mudd, which is a great technical school in Southern California. One of the things she did was change the way curriculum is taught. What they identified actually at the school was there was one guy who was ruining it for everybody. And I'm not just talking about women. It was a kind of personality trait among programmers that made learning difficult. So what they did is they focused on that guy rather than the whole program, because when they were dismissive and rude and created an environment, you know, there's lots of kind of things, you'll encounter it. And what they did is they focused on how they taught and how they included everybody in the curriculum. And so I think one of the things is demand that your curriculums are looked at and how they're taught in terms of one thing. The second thing is mentorship is critically important as a young person. One of the things that companies tend to do, not just companies, but at school too, the same thing. Mentorship is so critical for your career, and women do not do mentorship as well as men do. Or they're not as good at it as they don't, and I don't mean just women mentors, men. My mentor was a man, like Walt Mossberg, he was amazing. Attaching yourself to a mentor or several mentors is really important. One of the things that happens in tech companies is they actually do hire a lot of people in color or women, but then they don't create the training program to keep them there. And then they fail and they say, oh, look, they failed. Well, what happened was there wasn't the training underneath it in order to learn. I'd recommend a book of Hillbilly Elegy, which is J.D. Vance wrote it. He was talking about when he went to law school, he came from a very poor family. Economic problems are another issue of where you came from. And he talked about how he didn't understand networking at all in law school, and it was critically important to the success of a lawyer to understand cocktail parties, dress, how to behave at a dinner. He didn't know how to do these things. And so what's really important when you're entering school as a freshman is to remember that it's not just the learning that's going to be important, it's the networking, it's the relationship building, it's the mentorship that moves you forward. And I can tell you just from being an employer, men are just do it better. They raise their hands more, they come and ask for help more, they sell themselves more under my employees, and I have some very feminist employees, and it's a really interesting trait. I've noticed it in salary negotiations. I had a man that I was literally saying, oh, here's what I don't like, here's what I don't like, here's what I don't like. I was trying to fire him, and I was preparing. You have to do that now. You have to like give a lot of notice to someone before you fire them, and I was trying to show the things that he needed to improve on, which I knew full well he couldn't, but we have to give them a chance to do so. And I gave him all this feedback, all of which was negative. There wasn't one piece of positive feedback in this thing. And at the end, he looked at me and goes, "Thanks for that. That was really helpful. Now I'd really like a raise." And I was like, "What?" And I was like, "What? I'm sorry. What? Did you say raise?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "I'm trying to fire you, actually. I'll tell you the honest truth. I'm trying to find a way to fire you correctly. You're never getting a raise. You're never, ever, ever getting a raise. Just so you know, you don't deserve it. You don't need it." Well, he may need it. I don't know if he needs it. But I was like, "You don't deserve it. You perform terribly. And I'm assuming you're going to continue to perform terribly." I don't know what to say. But a woman of a similar woman who deserved a raise didn't ask for it. It's a very interesting thing to watch. And you can't, as employers, say, "No, ask for more. You can get more if you ask for more." You can't really do that when you're on the other side of it. And you can't really take them aside later to say it, but I'm telling you now. Ask for help from your teachers. Demand time. Demand attention. Take up space. And grab. I know that sounds grabby, but it is. Be grabby. All right, last question, right here. Right here. Go ahead. Yeah, I don't know where the man with the thing go. Man. Oh man, they never can get the job right. Go ahead, sorry. No, they can't. I love my sons. I'm so sound like such a mean mother. Right. Yeah. Yeah, I heard it. Right. Why does it disturb me? It doesn't disturb me. Oh, they were using the word multicultural? Right, I don't know why. I was sort of perplexed by that myself. It's, you know what, people don't like to say what it is. What, like, okay, 90% white guys in positions of power at Google, that's not diverse. It's like, and I think what it is it's sort of being used as like a battering ram by the right, you know, in terms of why should we have diversity, which is always, what they try to use it as is that you're lowering standards. You know what I mean? Like the idea is if you promote diversity, you're lowering standards, which is such bullshit. It's so ridiculous. If you listen very carefully when people talk about the word diversity, especially when they don't encourage it, what they do is they put it 14 down on the list of 10 things, right? So that's why the problem persists. I think it doesn't become number one issue. But the only time people in these companies, largely white men, talk about standards is when they're talking about women and people of color. Have you ever noticed that? Right? You know, oh, we have standards. And so they're always like, we have standards. We don't want to lower our standards. We have our standard. This is what they do all the time. So words are super important to me. And so when they say we don't want to lower our standards, that says to me, and when they say that, it happens all the time. We have standards. I said, well, you didn't have any standards, board of X company, when you ran this company into the wall, right? Because the 10 men on your board are all idiots, as far as I can tell, and I can prove it. You know what I mean? Or they did this wrong, or they did that wrong. Where were the standards when you were picking them? Like, that's the kind of thing that drives me mad. Like, and so I think diversity is very clear what it is. It's a range of people from different experiences, and it isn't just people of color and women, although those are critical elements of it. But it's age is another one that sort of gets left behind. It's life experience, it's geography, it's economic level, you know what I mean, where people came from. It's the kind of life you led to get there. Everyone has different experiences getting to life. And so I don't know why we use fake words for what it is. Do you know what I mean? Like, it perplexes me. I think diversity means a workforce that reflects your audience, that reflects the country, that reflects all kinds of things. And I'm not talking about a perfect one necessarily, but when you have numbers that are skewed like this in tech, there's something seriously wrong with the math. Like, it's just, they are doing it on purpose. If there's 90% white men running a company in their engineering, they are doing it on, it's not a mistake. It's actually being done on purpose. And we have to think hard about doing that. So I think diversity means not having that, where we have, you know, as much of a workforce. I struggle with it every day at my office. Like, I had 2 women leave, and I'm like, no, no, you know, and we spent a lot of time not hiring, actually. It hurts us. And I find myself this year not very successful, most years successful, but I definitely agonize and think about it and consider myself as a leader of failure if I don't do that. And it's on me. So is that a good answer? Okay, good. All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.